Hey everyone, it's Kevin, and this is a tutorial to create this bakery shop in Blender 3.0 with Grease Pencil. If you don't know what Grease Pencil is, it's an element that allows you to draw 2D but in 3D space. It's a pretty powerful tool that's great to draw with and adds another dimension to your artwork. If this is your first time to my channel, welcome. Grease Pencil is one of the tools I like using in my workflow. It's really fun, especially when combining it with 3D elements. However, in this tutorial, we'll be creating this bakery entirely with just Grease Pencil. I'll briefly go over some Grease Pencil basics and then head into the project. For the most part, you won't need a tablet. I'll try sticking with the shape tools, but towards the end, it might be helpful to have one for adding details, although you can still get by with a mouse. To start, let's head into the 2D animation workspace by clicking on this plus up here, going to 2D animation and selecting it from the list. Let's delete this cube with X, bring in a Grease Pencil object with Shift A, Grease Pencil, and then selecting blank. Now, let's go into draw mode by selecting from the drop down up here or hitting Ctrl plus Tab and selecting it from the radial menu. The first thing we'll want to do is to adjust some visibility options that will make drawing with Grease Pencil easier. Let's go to the overlays drop down here and check grid, 3D cursor, and canvas. If this is your first time using Grease Pencil, the two options here, stroke placement and drawing planes, are extremely important for using this tool successfully. Depending on what options you have selected in those drop downs will inform how you'll draw in 3D space. So starting with the drawing planes, if it's set to view, you can draw according to the view you have in your viewport. If it's set to front, the canvas will be situated to front view along the X. And notice how the canvas doesn't rotate compared to the previous one. If it's set to side, it will be situated along the side view to the Y. And if set to top, situated to the top view or perpendicular to the Z. Cursor allows you to get really precise angles by adjusting the rotation of the cursor here, which is not possible with the other planes. Let's set the drawing plane to front for now. Moving on to stroke placement, we have origin, which is what we were using to demonstrate the drawing planes. This option places your drawing according to the origin point of the object. For example, I drew some strokes here, but if I were to move this object further back in object mode and then draw a stroke, the placement would move accordingly. 3D cursor is the one that I use the most and will allow you to draw anywhere you place the cursor. Now, the next two kind of ignore the drawing plane depending on how they're used. Surface allows you to draw on top of meshes. This is really helpful if you're adding details or trying to get strokes to fit a certain shape. And the last one is stroke, where you can draw starting from other strokes. Let's set this to 3D cursor for now. So let's start by creating the walls of our building. In object mode, I'm setting the 3D cursor back to the world origin using Shift S, then right clicking and setting the Grease Pencil origin to the 3D cursor. Before we draw, let's first go into our render properties and under color management, change this from filmic to standard. This is for more accurate colors. Set the look to medium high contrast and then go into the world properties and set the background to a pale yellow color or whatever you'd like. Let's create a new layer inside our Grease Pencil object and rename it to walls and uncheck use lights. Then go into the materials tab, create a new material and name it walls. I'm making the stroke a brown color, checking the fill and selecting a light beige color. Enter front view with numpad 1 and go into draw mode. Select the box tool by either selecting it from the menu on the left or hitting shift plus spacebar and selecting it from the list. For radius, which affects the width of your stroke, I'm going to set it to 35 pixels and uncheck use pressure. Then bump up strength to 1 and uncheck use pressure as well. Last thing is the timeline down here. Make sure it's at the beginning. I like to set everything to 0. And because this was a new layer we created, a keyframe is automatically generated. But if you wanted to create another keyframe on another frame, you'll need to have this record button enabled. For now, we can keep it off. So I'm going to create a box that's about 8 squares tall and 6 squares wide. Then tab into edit mode, hit 1 for point select, and select a point on the right edge of the square. Hit Shift S and move the cursor to selected. Let's go back into draw mode and set the drawing plane to side this time and hit numpad 3 to enter side view. Then draw another 6x8 box again that touches the original. Go into edit mode and hit 2 for stroke select if you need to make some adjustments. Go back into draw mode and change the drawing plane to top. Hit numpad 7 for top view and draw a box that acts as the top of the walls. And now we have our walls. At this point, I want to set the camera view. This makes drawing with grease pencil a lot easier when set up early on. So I'm going to focus in on our walls and then hit Alt-Control numpad 0 to set the camera view. Then I'll go into the animation workspace, set the left screen to my camera view and adjust it with the right. If you want to leave the view like this, you can, but I want to animate this a bit. To do so, set the cursor to world origin and bring in an empty. Parent the camera to the empty with Ctrl P. Then go to 0 in your timeline and select the empty. Rotate it in the Z just a bit and then keyframe the rotation with I. Then go to frame 125 and rotate it slightly in the Z again and then keyframe. Then duplicate the keyframes at 0 with Shift D and put them at 250. I want to adjust the location and rotation of the camera as well. Let's do the same thing by keyframing at 0, then going to 125, adjusting, then keyframing, and then duplicating the keyframes at 0 to 250. So now we can reference what our drawing looks like in our camera view by hitting numpad 0. You can play this back, but make sure your playhead is at 0 when drawing or when creating a new layer. Go back into the 2D animation workspace. We're going to create the roof and the base. Let's duplicate this walls layer by clicking this drop down and selecting duplicate. Also, let's enable the option auto lock inactive layers. Rename the duplicate to roof. In edit mode, select all with A, then scale it down in the Z and S to scale it out. Then duplicate it again, shift it up in the Z, and then S to scale it out. Let's create a new material for the roof by selecting it all with A, creating a new material in the materials tab and clicking assign. Rename this to roof and copy the stroke color of the walls material by hovering over it, copying with Ctrl C and pasting it with Ctrl V in the new material. Then check fill in the roof material and let's pick a dark brownish color. Moving on to the base, let's duplicate the walls layer again and move it to the bottom. Just a quick note, the layers here are ordered by visibility, so whatever is on top will take visual priority. For example, if I move this walls layer to the top, it would appear over the roof. Now there are options for stroke depth order in the Object Data Properties tab, but for this piece, we're going to stick with 2D layers. Let's move the walls layer back down. Rename the walls duplicate to base and in edit mode, scale it down in the Z and then scale it out. Let's also create a new material for this. Name it base and assign it just like we did before. Copy the stroke color and make the fill a light gray color. Make any adjustments needed. If you find the stroke of your layers are too big, you can either adjust them in the layers panel under stroke thickness, or you can select any point or stroke individually and scale it with Alt S. So now we have this structure and we can add more to it. Create a new layer above the walls layer and rename it to Wall Details Outline and uncheck Use Lights. In the Materials tab, create a new material, rename it to Outline, and set the stroke color to the one we've been using with no fill. We're going to start drawing the doors and windows on the building. Click back on the walls layer and in edit mode with point select a point on this wall here so that we could move the cursor to it with Shift S. In draw mode, with the box tool selected, go to front view with 1. Make sure the stroke placement is set to 3D cursor and the drawing plane is set to front. Right click or hit Y to make sure your active layer is the wall details outline layer. Let's draw a rectangle for the door on the right here. Then let's draw another rectangle next to it for a large window, and then adjust as needed. Select the circle tool and create a circle roughly the size of the door. We're going to make these arched windows. So let's move it up in edit mode with stroke select. Then go into point select mode with 1, select the bottom half of the points and delete them with X. Then select the two endpoints on either side and E, then Z to extrude downward, and then hit F to fill. Then go into stroke select and make adjustments as needed. Let's create the shutters for it by selecting the box tool again and creating a rectangle roughly half the size of the window. Then duplicate and move it along in the X. It might be easier to move these to the center of the window frame and then scale them out to get a precise width. Then move them onto either side of the window. Select the window strokes, duplicate them with Shift D, and move them along the X so we have another window to the right. Now let's create the bakery sign. With the box tool selected, let's create a rectangle in this empty space here. In edit mode, with point select and holding Shift, I want to select these 3 points at the top and bottom. Then right click and select subdivide. Then while holding Shift, select these 2 points on the left and on the right, then hit S, then X to scale them along the X so that they're closer to the ends. Then delete the points in the corners and the center top point. We're trying to create these curved in stylized edges. In draw mode, select the arc tool and let's draw an arc between these 2 points from right to left. If you draw from left to right, the arc appears on top, but you can switch it with this blue dot. So I'm drawing the arc and adjusting it with the blue dot. Then in edit mode with stroke select, I'm going to duplicate it and rotate it along the X 180 degrees and position it. Then I'll select both those arcs, duplicate it along the X, and then flip it for the other side. The last thing is adding a half circle here, so I'm going to use the circle tool. I'll roughly draw the circle line to line and then bring it down. Then I'll go into edit mode with point select and then delete the bottom half of the circle. And now we have our sign. So let's start filling these in. I want to create 3 new materials. The first one, I'll make a pale blue color for the windows and name it accordingly. We can leave stroke unchecked. The second is a dark beige color for the sign. The third is a light brown color for the shutters and door. Let's create a new layer, name it Wall Details Fill, and uncheck Use Lights. Go into Front View and in Draw mode, select the Fill tool. Right click or hit U to set the active material to pale blue and start filling in the windows. Then right click and pick the light brown color. Fill in the shutters and door. Then right click again and select the beige color for the sign. If it doesn't fill correctly, you might need to join the endpoints with Ctrl J. Just a quick note on this. If you draw a stroke and want to continue it, you can select this option up here, Auto Merge, and it'll automatically join these strokes by distance. Now, I want to duplicate a few elements to the other side. Let's unlock the outline layer and in edit mode with stroke select, select the window elements and duplicate with Shift D and then X to move it over. Then rotate 90 degrees by hitting R, Z, and then 90 and place it accordingly. Go into side view if needed. Then do the same with the large bakery window. I want to scale this a bit wider to fit the length of the wall. So S then Y to scale it out and position accordingly. Let's make a glare for that large window. Create a new material, name it white. Leave stroke unchecked but fill to white. Create a new layer above Wall Details Fill and name it Window Glare and uncheck Use Lights. In draw mode, let's use the box tool to create a rectangle that's a little longer than the height of the window. Rotate it and go into your camera view to check it. Then move it back in the Y and adjust it so the top and bottom aren't seen in the camera view. You can play this back in the timeline, just make sure you position the playhead at 0 when you're done. Another quick note, if you find that you accidentally drew on a frame other than 0, you can just move it back to 0 in the timeline. Then we're going to mask this by checking masks under the layers and adding the fill layer. So now the glare appears to move. Duplicate it for the other window. Next, we'll create an awning. I want to create a striped awning on the top of the window and door here and on this side as well. Create a new layer above the Wall Details outline layer, name it Awning and uncheck Use Lights. Then create 2 new materials. The first will be a red and use the same stroke we've been using. The second will be another white but with the stroke color enabled. I'm going to name it White-S to differentiate it from the other one. Let's unlock the Wall Details outline layer and in edit mode, use point select to select this point at the bottom of the sign here and set cursor to selected. Then going into draw mode, change the drawing plane to cursor. Hit N in the viewport to bring up this side menu. Go into view and let's adjust the cursor rotation to get kind of a slant coming out from the building. I first reset everything to 0 and now I'm adjusting the X rotation to about 30 degrees. Go into top view with numpad 7, select the box tool and right click to make sure you're on the awning layer and have the red material selected. So I'm going to make a rectangle to about here and hide the roof layer if you need to. When you check it, you'll notice it's slanted according to the rotation we set for the cursor. Go back into top view and go into edit mode with stroke select. Duplicate that rectangle you just made and assign the White-S material to it. Then select both those rectangles and duplicate them along the X like this. Then to repeat the sequence all the way down, you can hit Shift R. I'll get rid of this last white one here. Then make scale and position adjustments as needed. Now I want to give the awnings these circular ends hanging down. In front view and in edit mode, select one of these points in front and set the cursor to selected. And in draw mode, we're going to set the drawing plane to front. So using the circle tool with the active material set to red, I'm going to make a circle roughly the width of these rectangles. Then I'll delete the top half of the circle and move it up with stroke select. Duplicate it like we did before, assign the color to white-S, and then repeat for the length of the awning. You might need to make some positioning and sizing adjustments. Now I want to fill in the side here, so in edit mode, select one of the points on the end. Then hit cursor to selected, and in draw mode, set the drawing plane to side. Then entering side view with 3, select the line tool and set the active material to red. Draw a line from the top of the awning to roughly where it starts to bend. Then with point select in edit mode, select the bottom point of that line and hit E, then Y to extrude to make a complete awning. Adjust as needed. I want to duplicate this awning for the other side. In edit mode, hit A to select all, shift D to duplicate, and then shift it over like we did with the windows. Then rotate it with R, Z, and then 90. Because the awning wasn't drawn in that orientation, we need to flip it by going to Grease Pencil, Mirror, and then selecting Y Global. Then it should visually look correct, and you can position it accordingly. Using the same stroke placement and technique as the awnings, I want to create these planters for the windows. Create a new layer on top of the awnings layer, name it Planters, and uncheck Use Lights. Unlock Wall Details Outline, and in edit mode, select a point at the bottom of this window to move the cursor to that point with Shift S. Then in draw mode, set drawing plane to cursor. I want the cursor to be angled upward instead of the other way around, about 105 degrees in the X. In front view, with the box tool selected, set the active material to roof and draw a rectangle the width of the window. Then move it out in the Y and adjust as needed. Select a corner point and move the cursor to the selected point with Shift S. In draw mode, set the drawing plane to side, and in side view, select the polyline tool. Draw a line from the top left of the planter by click dragging to where it touches the building and click. You can hold down Shift to constrain the angle of it. Then down the building, click, and then to the bottom left of the planter and click. Then press enter to confirm and adjust as needed. Let's duplicate this side to the other side to complete the planter box. So select it with stroke select in edit mode and duplicate it along the X. Notice that when we do that, it doesn't visually appear correct, and that's because there's actually a stroke order within each of the grease pencil layers. So not only do you have a layer order here, the individual strokes within each layer also have a hierarchy as well. So in order to push the shape behind the first two we drew, select it, right click, go to Arrange, and then Send to Back. If you've used Adobe Illustrator, it acts the same way. Another quick note, if you would like to have the strokes populate from the back instead of the front, you can select this option, Draw Strokes on Back, and all new strokes will be automatically positioned behind your other strokes. So with our planter finish, I want to duplicate this for the other three windows. Make sure all the other layers are locked, and in edit mode, hit A to select all, then duplicate along the X for the right window. Then select both, duplicate along the X, and then rotate with R, Z, and then 90. Then right click, mirror, and select Y Global and position accordingly. I want a longer planter situated on top of this awning on this side, so I'm going to duplicate this planter here, shift it down in the Z, and then S, Y to scale it along the Y, and adjust as needed. Now I want to create these pillars on the corners of the building to add more detail. Let's duplicate the walls layer and move it to the top of the awnings layer and rename it to pillar. In edit mode, select all with A and scale it with S, then Shift Z to constrain the height of it. Then go into top view and position the pillar at the corner of the building. Again, hide the roof if needed. Then duplicate the pillar layer, rename it to pillar rear, and move the layer down on top of the walls layer. Then move the element in this layer to the rear left of the building. Duplicate it for the rear right. Alright, almost done. I want to create a bakery sign that hangs from the left side of the building. So select the point on this pillar and move the cursor to selected. Then create a new layer on top of that duplicate pillars layer, rename it to hanging sign, and uncheck Use Lights. Create a new material, set it to the usual stroke color, and for fill, pick a gold color. Enter side view, and in draw mode, make sure the drawing plane is set to side. Select the box tool, set the active material to the gold color, and let's create a beam that stems outward from the building. Then take the circle tool and add a circular endpoint here. take the box tool again, set the active material to outline, and create a square that will act as the sign. Select all the points in that shape and right-click Subdivide. Delete the corner points one at a time, then take your arc tool and draw the necessary inset arcs like we did before with the other sign. Then in draw mode, with the fill tool selected, set the active material to sign and fill it. Then go into edit mode, select that color block and right click Arrange Send to Back like we did before so it appears behind the strokes. Select the fill and strokes of the sign, duplicate it and size it in. Assign the walls material to the smaller color block. Then in draw mode with the active material set to gold, let's create the hinges with the box tool. Lastly, with the outline material and arc tool, I'm creating an arc to act as a support beam. Adjust as needed. So with the crux of our building done, we're going to move on to the plants and trees. For this, we're going to install 2 free add-ons. So go up to Edit, Preferences, and search Grease Pencil Tools, check it, and Sapling Tree Gen, and check it. Then X out of this. So we'll start with the plants. Create a new layer on top of the planters layer and name it Plants. Uncheck Use Lights. Then in draw mode with the draw tool selected, go into Active Tool and Workspace Settings. Click this drop down here and select Download and Import Texture Brush Pack. If we go up here, we have more brushes we can work with. Select the Leaves 2 brush. Notice that the color doesn't use any of the materials we created, and that's because it's using Vertex color, which is the other way of coloring within Grease Pencil. You can access this by switching the mode up here. To quickly go over this, the difference is that with Material Paint mode, because we've stored the color in a material slot, it makes it easier to change all the elements that share that material. And with Vertex color, it's much better if you're freely illustrating because you can easily change colors on the fly and not have to create a new material slot each time. You can also store them in a color palette up here. However, changing color isn't as easy as Material Paint mode. So back to the plants. The cool thing about this Leaves brush is that there's some randomization in it and you can adjust it by going to the options at the top here. But I'm going to leave everything as is. So set the stroke placement to stroke and pick a palish green color and then just draw on top of these planters like so. If you wanted to adjust the color of these, you could use the tint tool here and whatever color you select, you can go over the strokes you made and change the color. Or you can go to Vertex Paint mode and use the Replace tool. It's important to note that Vertex color works along points, so depending on how many points you have, you could achieve a color change that's gradual or sharp, but you don't really need to worry too much about that here. So now I want to put some greenery at the base just to have something around the building. I'm on the same layer and just going over these elements. I think these brushes are more optimal with a tablet, but because we're still using a mouse, to get some size variation, we can go to Sculpt mode, select the Thickness tool, and go over those strokes. Now for the trees. Let's bring in a sapling tree object by hitting Shift A, Curve, then Sapling Tree Gen. I think anytime you bring in this tree, it's situated at the world origin. So if you can't see it, the preset I'm selecting is a Japanese maple, and in custom shape, all the values will be 0.01. So once you click out, the options will confirm and we have our tree curve. Now, I know I said we were going to make this completely out of Grease Pencil, but this part works better with a mesh. Let's convert this to a mesh by right-clicking and selecting Convert to Mesh. Let's go into Material Properties, select New, and make this an emission shader. Select a color that's light medium brown. Position the tree behind the rear left of the building and shift plus right click on it to move the 3D cursor on top of it. Bring in a new Grease Pencil blank and uncheck Use Lights for the layer that's created. Select the Leaves 1 brush and set the stroke placement to surface and offset to 0. Let's pick a reddish brown color and start drawing on the branches. It'll look a little sparse, but we'll fix that in a bit. If you've seen my Grease Pencil tree tutorial, I'm using the same technique. Once you're done, go into Sculpt mode and go over the leaves with the Thickness tool until it resembles a dense tree. Now, I want to duplicate this tree and position it at the rear right of the building. If you want to adjust the color of these trees, you can again use the Tint tool, or you can apply a hue and saturation modifier on the Grease Pencil objects. Now we're going to start adding more specific details, and this is the part where I do recommend having a tablet. Again, it's not completely necessary, it'll just make things easier. To start, create a new layer on top of the planters layer and name it Details. Uncheck Use Lights and hide the plants layer. Set stroke placement to stroke, select the pencil brush, set the active material to outline, and have use pressure checked for radius if you are using a tablet. Let's draw some lines of detail on the shutters and then on the planters. For the windows, I'm also adding some framing elements. And once that's done, move on to the walls and add lines of details there, and maybe the awnings. Then the door, and then the corner beams. Now for the main bakery sign, we're going to change the Vertex color by clicking on the button up here. Change the color to white and draw these inner lines. Then we'll write the word bakery or whatever you'd like. Then switch back to material paint mode. Go to the hanging sign and let's add some details to the sides here. With the fill tool selected, set the active material to walls, and we're actually going to use Vertex paint. I want to make a sort of muffin icon. For this part, uncheck use pressure for radius. So let's select a golden brown color, and while holding shift, draw the top. Then select a pastel blue or pink color and draw the base. Then in edit mode with stroke select the top of the muffin and arrange it to the front. Then enable use pressure again. Go back to material paint mode and set the active material to outline and add details. The last thing we'll do is add flowers onto the plants. Create a new layer above the plants, name it flowers, and uncheck use lights. Set the stroke placement to stroke and select the fill tool. Set the active material to roof and go into Vertex color. Pick a red color and draw some floral shapes. It might look a little wonky, but you can always redo it. Generally, I would draw these in front view and then individually place them, but this will work for now. Then pick a yellow color for some variation. And now we have our bakery building. I invite you to add more details using the techniques we discussed, like a lamppost or roofing, but I'll leave that up to you. Because this is a grease pencil object, we can make it subtly shake with a grease pencil noise modifier. So if you click this wrench, apply noise, and play it, it moves. You can lessen the position factor if it's too much. So that's it for the tutorial. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. If I were to approach this project outside of this tutorial, I would probably model some 3D meshes and then use grease pencil to supplement the details. The reason being that it's a bit quicker and better for more complicated camera movements. But I hope this was helpful for understanding how to draw with the tool in terms of stroke placement and the drawing planes. If you guys have any questions, feel free to comment below or reach out to me on Instagram at KevAndRam. I am planning on putting out more tutorials in the future, so let me know what else you'd like to see. In the meantime, you can check out some of the other resources I have, like this 2D and 3D flower vase scene and this grease pencil and geometry node snowflake. Thanks again, and see you guys next time.